Good afternoon, dear participants. I think we may also start this session. Welcome to the session, The Future Ready CFO. My name is Asel. I'm supervisor of the University of the Future, and today I will moderate this session. Let me introduce you our speaker, Mr. Vikas Agrawal, who is the Regional Head of Policy Eurasia New Market Development of the ACCA. ACCA is one of the strategic partners of the University of the Future. In cooperation with the ACCA, we're actively promoting professional development in areas such as financial management, audit, assurance, accountancy, and other areas. For over 3 years, over 400 professionals have successfully completed ACCA training provided by the Bureau for Continuing Professional Development. Today's session, The Future Ready CFO, will look at the future of CFO, type overall CFO needs to play, contextual background for transformation, including different factors. Before I start, I kindly ask all participants to learn about the rules of the session. The duration will be 45 minutes, including 10 minutes for Q&A. The session is being translated to Russian. To enable Russian translation, please, on your Zoom controls, click interpretation and click the language that you would like to hear. Let me also speak it in Russian. Уважаемые участники, у нас есть функция перевода данной сессии на русский язык. Вам нужно нажать на глобус и выбрать русский язык для вашего удобства. Для того, чтобы услышать только русский язык, вам нужно mute original audio, то есть вам нужно выключить оригинальное аудио. For questions to the speaker, we kindly ask you to use the chat box or Q&A section. And we may start. Vikas, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be speaking here at the BCPD University of the Future Conference. I think ACCA has been working with the BCPD since its inception. And as always, we are incredibly glad to be one of their strategic partners. As you've heard, my name is Vikas Agrawal, and I'm the Regional Head of Policy here at ACCA. Now, my role really is to work with our Professional Insights team, our research team, to bring their work into the markets that we work in, Kazakhstan, for example, in order to support finance professionals and policymakers. Now, for those of you that aren't aware, our research program helps advance the global accounting and finance profession, and it actually drives developments to our qualification. But it is also complemented by our broader policy work and public interest and public affairs work. And that really helps maximize the value we can bring to our partners, to our employers, to our members, and to our students. Today, I'm very pleased to be speaking on the Future Ready CFO, and this draws upon a range of our research reports, all of which are available online. The presentation will examine key trends shaping the future of the profession and how these may play out. It's also going to look at what the future CFO looks like and how do we get there. And it's really about how do we ensure that we keep ourselves and our teams trained for the future. So let's start. Now, this is a quote from one of our roundtable participants. Now, they stressed that the CFO role is becoming ever more broad. There are technology implications as well as leadership implications. The role has a close working relationship with the CEO and is essentially strategic in nature. Now, of course, if we contrast this with the classic view of the CFO as the head of the finance function, we see that the role has changed and continues to do so. And this really is the theme of our work. And so in this session, we're going to cover a number of different themes, which hopefully will give you a sort of good story as to where it's going. So the first one is how we perceive the role today. The second element is what implications this has for the role going forwards. Item 3, the changes in the skill set of the CFO. And 4, what actions we need to take to ensure that we are developing the next generation of CFOs. And lastly, the dynamic forces shaping the future of the profession. Now, it doesn't matter really where you are in your career journey. It's important to note these factors because if you are planning for a future in finance leadership, it is never too early to start planning your career now. Okay, so let us start by considering the role of the CFO as it exists today. What are the expectations and how is the role changing? Now, by understanding this, we can develop a picture of how far the transformation of the role is occurring and how much further we might go. We ran a survey in June 2020 in which we had over 1,000 responses from senior members, CFOs and CEOs from around the world. The results of the survey give some interesting insights into the CFO role and how it is developing. Our first question was whether the CFO role was changing relative to the other C-level executives. Now, 72% of respondents felt that the role was either increasing or significantly increasing in terms of its size and its reach. When we look at the responses specifically from CEOs, who completed the survey, an 82% majority thought that the role was increasing or significantly increasing in importance, in contrast to only 66% of the CFO respondents. And so actually that gap in perception is something that we encounter throughout the results. As I mentioned, the survey was undertaken in June last year, and so it would be remiss to not consider the impact of the pandemic on the role. Now, we have seen finance functions needing to become more responsive as planning horizons have changed dramatically. CFOs in some instances have been left with just a core group of staff as organizations took the opportunity to take advantage of job retention schemes, to make redundancies and everything else. And so we asked through our survey, we asked the respondents what the impact of the pandemic was on the role. Now, 58%, so a good proportion thought there had been some change, with 7% thinking that the role had been completely changed. Again, when we look just down to CEO respondents, 25% that it had changed completely, and 29% said it had changed significantly. So the CEO views the CFO role incredibly importantly, and it's certainly in global pandemic situations as ever more important. And this really underlines that the CFO-CEO relationship is fundamental to the success of many organizations, but it can be often underplayed. Our survey respondents were then asked to consider what the greatest challenges were for the CFO. Now, unsurprisingly, the top three are technology transformation, speed of business change, and governance. And all of these relate to the changing world we live in. I'll come back to those later on. The need to address the changing working environment, one where customer centricity is at the heart of digital transformation, cannot be far away from many CFOs' agendas. Indeed, we actually did some work with Alibaba Cloud on this in 2019 on a joint paper on digital transformation and the role of the CFO. Perhaps surprising was how low the sustainability agenda was ranked by our respondents. With this and with other recent ACCA surveys, the role of finance in business in the sustainability agenda ranks lower than one might expect. This is surprising, but as we see greater shifts to non-financial reporting, better sort of value corporate reporting, in particular frameworks such as integrated reporting, sustainability is moving up the agenda, whether accountants and finance professionals recognize it or not. I think many finance professionals are contributing to the sustainability agenda unknowingly, or at least they don't necessarily see it as something extra. It's just part of business as usual, which is really, really good to see. Interestingly, succession planning was also not seen as a challenge. Now, this is something that I'll come back to later on. So we can conclude from our research that the role of the CFO at present, by saying that it has moved significantly beyond that of pure financial stewardship. It's value stewardship, if anything. And it's a role that is still so important, and for many of our interviewees, it is essential to the core of the role. But the role has moved beyond that. It is strategic, and it looks to a broader agenda than a pure financial one. It is transformative at the heart of digitalization. In both of these elements, it is the role that is the adjunct to the CEO, so it is working most closely with the CEO. And as one interviewee encapsulated it, if the CEO is the forward thinker, then the CFO is the conscience of that role, enabling but providing appropriate challenge. So if that has summarized the role of the CFO today, what of the CFO of the future? Where on a journey of exploration are we? So to inform the discussion about the future role, we developed 6 hypotheses to test. Firstly, that the CFO role shifts to one that is predominantly focused on stakeholder and investor management rather than safeguarding and reporting. Now, many of our participants questioned the word rather and actually suggested that it should be as well as. There was a feeling that safeguarding and reporting role remained fundamental to the CFO, no matter what other additional facets were added to the role. So you have to get the core fundamentals right, and that was a recurring theme. Our second hypothesis concerned the strategic nature of the role and whether the CFO had a leading role in strategy formulation. Aligned to this was the third hypothesis, that the CFO was concerned with growth rather than just cost control. These two were debated by our roundtable participants. They felt that cost control was always core to the CFO role, but that a growth agenda was equally important, that value stewardship I mentioned. Now, to achieve growth, we need to look at purpose, the 3 Ps of people, purpose, and profit that are increasingly referenced in relation to organizations. Should the CFO role encompass a broader role that encompasses 6 capitals: financial, manufactured, intellectual, human, social, and responsible, and natural? Now, those 6 capitals are identified in the International Integrated Reporting Council's framework. And if it did encompass those, in our fifth hypothesis, that the CFO was becoming the CPO, Chief Performance Officer, with a much broader remit to manage and report on performance across the use of the capitals. A role that has promoted forward modeling and the use of the tools such as predictive analytics, rather than just reporting on the past. Often way after it actually happened, something had happened. Now, one CFO commented that the ability to define what performance looks like is an entity that is fundamentally a contention for the soul of the place, because you get to say what is good and what is bad. Now think about that just for a moment. The CFO gets to comment on what is good and what is bad for the organization. If you've got that, you are largely running the show. It is a space that CFOs and finance functions want to play in. So really, the CFO is articulating to the CEO, the Chief Investment Officer, the Chief Strategy Officer, the Chief Sustainability Officer, what is good and what is bad? How do we ensure that we're actually performing across all of these areas? Now, and finally, does this mean that the CFO was progressing the next stage of their careers towards the CEO role? Now, this had a mixed response from participants. Some felt it to be an opportunity, while others felt it was a step too far, and that many CFOs did not have the entrepreneurial spirit of the CEO. Now, you can decide how you feel about that, whether as a CFO, a future CFO, you're looking to become a CEO. You may look to become your own, the CEO of your own enterprise. But regardless, some participants felt that the hypotheses had already been achieved, whilst others felt that it was a journey underway. This was not a question of organizational size, rather one of personal perception. Now, having established our trend, we can consider the future skill set of the CEO. At the heart of the role remains financial acumen, that financial skill set that CFOs started with their qualification, such like ours. For all of this was the bedrock of their competence. Yet that competence extended into other areas. An ability to be strategic and understand the development of the business, to have ethics, governance, and risk management at the core of what they do, to be a technology transformer who embraces data, and for many survey respondents, the CFO is the custodian of the organization's data. This is why we've actually developed a new certificate in data analytics. They are to be a leader across the organization with deep personal skills in many areas. They have a knowledge of the industry and organization beyond the boundaries of the entity into the supply chain, and managing the supply chain for strategic advantage was echoed by several CFOs. They are a relationship manager with the investors, recognizing that the definition of investors exceeds that which we might think of in terms of financial capital, but into the other capitals of the Integrated Reporting Council's framework. So looking at natural capitals, human capital. It's really important to understand that investors nowadays don't just look at the numbers. They want to see what you're doing with your staff, with your material use, your impact on the environment, how society perceives you. This is all something that the CFO has to be conscious of. And last two, the ultimate business consultant, and with all of that implies. And lastly, the ability to drive transactions and to derive value from them. It's not just about financial value, but broader value. These skills have a basis in the ACCA professional quotients, but they extend and refine these for the level at which the CFO needs to operate to be successful. Now, we've always said that a finance professional has to have a balance of the professional quotients. Now, your role will depend which you strengthen or which are most important, but the CFO has to be a master of all of them. The CFO role is a flexible one. And of course, not all of the skills will be needed all the time to the same degree in each role. A smaller business, for example, may require more of a leadership role, for example, but nevertheless, these remain relevant. Our final consideration was the development of the CFOs for tomorrow. Now, as you can see in previous research reports that we've done, Learning for the Future and Future Ready Accountancy Careers for the 2020s, the traditional ladder structure of the career model has evolved away. Both by choice and by need, career paths do not follow a single straight line upwards. We see them going sideways, diagonally, cross sector, between functional areas, and that's necessary because we one, for interest, but also because we need people to be more adaptable. Careers are now more flexible and adaptable. One concern we found, though, was whether organizations were doing enough to grow the next generation of CFOs and really getting to the heart of what experiences do they need to have. We started considering this last point by asking the survey respondents whether they considered that they were paying enough attention to the development of the next generation of CFOs. Apologies. Now, as you can see, just under half said no, and a further fifth were not sure. Now, I think this suggests that we're not creating the career paths to develop the next generation. Not yet, anyway. A challenge, especially as the ask of the CFO is significant. I think what's interesting to note is that only 25% of our CEOs thought that not enough attention was being paid to this. You can see quite a bit of a difference there. Question is, how do we actually currently develop the next generation of CFOs? For many of the participants, it was a case of developing the skills on the job, so growing in experience. Many CFOs commented that they always sought to develop somebody as a successor, so that their organization was not left without capability. And I mentioned earlier on about successor planning. Interestingly, as we speak about the need for broader experience and for finance teams to be super connectors, only 29% thought that secondments outside of finance were an active step being taken. Now, given the importance of communication in the role, finance business partner experience was rated most strongly as a source of relevant experience, with 57% of our respondents identifying it. Direct finance function experience was also rated highly. Now, this is something that you may not have considered in your career paths, but a finance business partner role is incredibly important as you're providing that sage advice to many different functions within an organization. So moving on to the qualification side of things. This is an interesting one. About 54% of the respondents that we spoke to felt that the accountancy qualification was essential for a CFO in the next 3 to 5 years. So we see that many come from different finance qualifications, but specifically an accountancy qualification, one like ours, one that is not just about the numbers, but is much more strategically focused, is going to be incredibly important. And actually, the CFOs that we interviewed felt exactly the same, that an accountancy qualification is going to be essential. Now, this, of course, is perhaps unsurprising given the importance of the financial skill set that we talked about earlier on. But I guess the point is that there are many qualifications available. Many give you a broad sense of business. They give you a broad sense of organizational behavior. But what is going to be most valued at CFO level? And clearly 54% felt that an accountancy qualification was essential. So moving on, what can we take away about the development path of the CFO? Firstly, is that it's an informal pathway, especially as we have established that the skill set is broad. So it's not about a strict career path. It's about finding and developing yourself in the appropriate ways. It is an area that we need to pay attention to. Otherwise, we may not be developing the next generation that is fundamental to organizational success. And there's, of course, an issue here in that if you are thinking about succession planning or you want to be in that succession planning line, how do you get there? It shouldn't necessarily be about personal relationships, though that is important. It's about having the right skill set to ensure that you become the most obvious choice. Okay, so I've talked about the future of the CFO and how the path is changing, how the role is changing, how it's becoming ever more strategic. But it's actually really important to understand what else is going on. And that is the external factors taking place. Now, let me start by talking about opportunity to give you some context. We know that technology and digital developments are rapidly impacting the global economy. I talked about technology earlier on a little bit. Digital advances, particularly, are transforming the fundamentals of businesses and organizations. But there are other forces at play too, transforming the world of work, and not just in the future, but right now. Globalization, protectionism, changing expectations of individuals in the workplace, so how the next generation is looking to work, what they value most. Shifting social values, new types of and new levels of connectivity, and of course demographics are changing constantly. It is in the face of this that a clear imperative facing organizations is to survive and to be financially sustainable for the longer term. This is where the CFO comes in. But there is, of course, also more scrutiny. Organizations don't just have to generate financial return, they must be better corporate citizens too. Sustainable businesses, after all, the very lifeblood of a sustainable economy and a sustainable planet. And so we have to think about this in the context of opportunity. The profession will continue to play and offer an incredibly exciting and meaningful career, especially to Generation Z that are coming into the workforce now. And of course, this is really important as to how we shape our organizations, how we build sustainable organizations that value the staff, but also create value for the wider stakeholder environment. So thinking about this, what are the other factors impacting the future of work and the future of finance? In a piece of our work, we identified 20 trends shaping the future. Now, I'm not going to talk to all 20 of these. You know, there's more detail in our research, but I want to just pick out a few of them, which I think are really most important. Now, automation. There are two things very quickly to say about automation. Firstly, it isn't new. We've seen automation for a number of years, arguably for decades. But the scale of automation is increasing rapidly, and the number of possibilities is increasing as well, especially with the advent of robotics technologies. And this is going to be complemented by emerging technologies such as AI, machine learning, natural language processing. Now, communication tools. I'm sure we're all sick and tired of Zoom calls, but just think about that for a moment. You know, we've transformed from an organization or from a profession which heavily heavily depended on basically just email. But if you wanted wider meetings, you'd fly everywhere. Right now, the pandemic has forced us to move to new ways of working, to a lot more video conferencing, Teams-based working, and that hyperconnectivity is providing professional accountants with new possibilities for sharing, connecting, empowering, challenging, and adding value to organizations of all sizes and sectors, virtually and instantaneously across the globe. You can help a client in Japan in 1/2 an hour and a client in Brazil later on that day with no issues around travel whatsoever. Now, beyond technology, you know, we see that there's a growing aspiration for people to want meaning and purpose in their careers, especially within Generation Z. We've actually got some research coming out in May that looks very specifically at Generation Z, and we've actually had support from BCPD in supporting that. Another key trend shaping the future is data. Now, in the information age, we believe data will reshape the roles of accountants everywhere. It's incorrect to say that data is the new oil. And the reason I say that is because oil retains value. Oil sitting there has value, you know, it is intrinsic. But data without proper analytics is just noise. It actually can take value away from you. So you have to understand how analytics of data is changing the workplace too. And it's very, very powerful. It's incredibly powerful. Again, which is why we created a certificate in it, because we know that to be to extract value from the huge volumes of data coming through, you have to be able to understand it, and that's both to look at previous trends, but also to predict future pathways. We're seeing organizations transform and all sorts of new business models emerging, and of course, this is going to provide brand new opportunities for professional accountants, for future CFOs. And this really is as both business advisors, but also potentially as entrepreneurs, ones that may end up leading organizations themselves. So we talk a lot about opportunity, and I'm not gonna go through these in a lot of detail, but really we identified 5 career zones. The assurance advocate. This is somebody that champions providing assurance to the sustainability of organizations. Not sustainability just in the ecological sense, but actually how viable is your organization into the future. We also know that technology and data is going to shape the future of assurance. Moving on, the business transformer. I mean, there are some truly brilliant emerging opportunities for professional accountants. Ones that can. We've seen a lot more innovative small accounting firms coming through that are able to transform their clients' platforms to make those businesses digital. And that's really where somebody can add value. Moving on very quickly, the data navigator. I'm not going to talk about data in too much. I've said it. It's moving data from big to smart, and that's really what adding value means. The digital playmaker, how technology transforms business growth, looking for opportunities to insert technology into organizations. Sustainability trailblazer. Now, this again, I said this isn't just about ecology, environment. This is about making businesses more sustainable for the future, and that is about improving and capturing and reporting value, right? So value like natural capital value, social value, public value, all of these are important. In addition to these career opportunities, I said before, it's important to look at what else is going on externally. And our research program over the past 3 years has broadly pointed to 6 dynamic forces of change affecting society and organizations. Now, again, this is all linked to the CFO of the future, right? To recognize and to understand what all of these mean to you, to your organizations, to your clients, to your partners. Now, I'm sure you'll agree the most prevalent of all the global systemic shocks is happening right now, and it's COVID-19. Governments and businesses around the world have had to put people first, rightly so. COVID is having a dramatic impact on all economies around the world. I know it's obviously impacted Kazakhstan in a significant way, and of course with second, third, and fourth waves, it's a constant challenge. International trade has slowed. In some sectors, almost to a standstill. International travel and transport, that's all slowed down, impacting supply chains. It's not just about ships getting stuck in canals. If no one's purchasing, then actually supply chains are absolutely halted. There's been a real impact on actual shipping containers being stuck at one side of the planet because there's been no demand, and that's pushed up shipping prices unexpectedly for many businesses. Now, all organizations, large and small, are suffering, but small organizations tend to have less financial buffers. And this really is where accountants, finance professionals, and CFOs can play an advisor role in supporting and developing business continuity plans and then looking for external sources of information. So from governments, from finance firms, looking for new forms of finance as well in particular. So not just looking at bank loans, not just looking at debt, but thinking about equity sharing, looking at supply chain finance, looking at all new manner of external financing. Technology. Now, of course, I could spend hours talking about technology, but it goes back to the point I mentioned earlier on, which is a digital business can reach a wider consumer base than a face-to-face one. Imagine your local retailer that sells, you know, either clothing or electronics. Think about how many transactions they process in an hour. Now compare that to an online retailer like Amazon. Even within just one particular sector, Amazon will process thousands upon thousands of transactions in that same space of time. Now, businesses are using accountants and finance professionals for their rounded technical and business and professional skills. Going back to analytics, analytics supports decision making, but that only comes by asking the right business questions, and that's the role that you play. All of this requires investment, and again, finance professionals will provide the insight, the input into what is valuable, what is not valuable, and build the business case to support that investment. Moving on to the next big dynamic, social environmental. Now, I cannot stress this enough. As I mentioned, you cannot do business on a dead planet. Society expects businesses to behave better, to be greener, and to promote equality. I'm sure many of you have heard of Deliveroo. If not, it's a food delivery organization. They had their IPO in London a couple of weeks ago, and by all accounts, it has been described as one of the biggest flops, failures in some time. And it's not for me to criticize, but many organizations, many investors have said, you know, we're just aware that they don't necessarily treat their staff particularly well. And, you know, that has a big impact on people. You know, investors don't want organizations, personally, you know, if you have a shares, you know, thinking about shareholder capital, shareholder activity and activism, shareholders don't want to see organizations behaving badly anymore because it reflects badly on them. They have their own values to protect. So here it's really where organizations can play a role in creating multi-capital value, long-term value, and creating sustainable organizations. As I mentioned before, you know, just financial reporting does not really actually report on the full value created by organizations. So it's about introducing and adopting non-financial reporting, value reporting, and integrated reporting we see as the best format for doing so. And this is really just about, it comes down to communication. You know, good communication helps investors, stakeholders really understand what's going on and where you're creating value, and what you're doing to manage long-term risk as well, whether that is ecological or societal. There are now, this is a really important one as well, there are now 5 different generations in the workforce and far greater cultural diversity. Now, we need to be encouraging inclusivity and cross-skilling between the younger, more technological savvy generation and using their digital competence, and cross-pollinating that with the older generations who have business experience, a much longer professional experience. And of course, this is really about blending the professional quotients, you know, your vision, your emotional intelligence. These get better in time, but you need to have cross functional teams or cross, you know, diverse teams to generate better financial performance. The next element is geopolitics. Now, this is a big one. I mean, there are initiatives like Belt and Road, for example. You know, this created an opportunity for greater trade and competition because trade barriers are reduced, and of course, accountants play a pivotal role in this. But there are also we've seen almost overnight shifts in relationships between, say, the US and China, and how that has handled. You know, Brexit is a very, very good example of a geopolitical event that has had a knock-on effect on pretty much everyone that deals business with the EU or with the UK. Now, accountants and finance professionals play a huge role in supporting contingency planning and understanding what the impact of these decisions mean. Regulation. Now, regulation, when done right, is a force for good because it supports consistency and comparability across organizations. It promotes fairness in competition. It also provides healthy and safe environments to work in. And of course, it defines the tax burden. But it can be a challenge when it's not sufficient, clear, timely, or well communicated by governments. Now, the role of the accountant and the finance professional is to remain knowledgeable of regulation changes to ensure that businesses are getting the best from those changes and from those rules in the most ethical way. It is not about evasion. It's not about unethical avoidance. It's about ensuring a fair outcome for business and society. Now, if society prospers, benefits flow back to the business. We talk a lot about trickle-down economics, and I think personally that doesn't work. Actually, the more value you add to society, the more value you add to business. And so it is there I'm going to draw to a close. You've heard enough from me about the future of CFO, about how the role itself is changing, sort of on the internal reflection, how it needs to manage business risks better, how it needs to be more strategic, how it needs to work with the CFO, with the CEO, how it needs to add value across the organization. And of course, the external factors as well. So how do you get from where we are now to creating the best future-ready CFOs possible? What are the external factors shaping that? Are you going to pick somebody to be the next CFO that maybe have lots of experience in finance functions, have lots of experience in strategic thinking, but has absolutely no appreciation for societal risks, ecological risks, any experience on change programs or digital transformation? Arguably, no. You need somebody that is well-rounded across all of those areas that's going to be able to add real value to the organization and to all of its stakeholders. So, yes, well, thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that insightful. So I think I've gone slightly over time, but I'm more than happy to take any questions now, either in the chat, or feel free to email me. The team can share my email address. That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Vikas, for such insightful presentation. I think this is the trends that you see are relevant not only for the financial and accountancy professions, but also for the rest of the professions that includes management. I think we have questions from Eleonora. Eleonora, yes, you can ask your question.
Hi. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. And I do have one question to ask.
Sure.
How will soft skills give CFO a sharper edge, and why it is important? And do you agree that the agility to adapt to continuous change is the most important quality for successful CFO? Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, on the soft skills point, I think I can't emphasize that enough. If you are organizations, the international barriers within organizations are breaking down every day. It has never been easier to trade internationally, to build client bases all over the world, to have partners everywhere. But even domestically, you work with new types of organizations, new people. If you have not worked on developing your soft skills, your ability to engage with them meaningfully, build meaningful relationships, understand their emotional drivers, their values, then you're going to find yourself losing clients. You're going to find yourself losing business. You're going to find yourself actually that your progression is limited. I mean, we are now marked. I mean, on a very basic level, our performance within the workplace is not just marked on our objectives, are ticking the box about either profit or work packages. It's actually, what are the values that we've been demonstrating in the workplace? How do others perceive us, and how would they articulate what we do and how we do it? So important. In terms of agility, as I mentioned, the career path of old, having a straight ladder upwards it still exists. You have technical specialists, but in terms of real leadership, you need to be moving in all sorts of directions. The next career opportunity isn't necessarily going to be the most obvious one, nor should you take the one that comes to you straight away in your career ladder. Think about what you want to achieve. You want to become well-rounded, so you want to get experience moving from from the assurance sector into business transformation, because actually, or into strategy roles, because how can you be a successful CFO if you don't know how all of those functions work. You know, even within, say, HR, right? You've got to think about how you take on staff, how you treat staff, your financial, your employment policies, how that's going to affect your business. Right? As I said, Deliveroo is a very, very good example of this, of where things can potentially go wrong. But there are many other examples of, for example, how CFOs understand and recognize the risks and opportunities of social media. Now, your reputation can be broken in a heartbeat by bad reviews placed online. Right, you have to recognize if there's a scandal involving your organization, it is globally understood, or at least there is global knowledge of it within moments. How do you factor that in? If you don't understand social media and the power of it, how do you manage the risk, mitigate the risk, or the opportunity, of course? So yeah, agility is incredibly important. Obviously, continuing professional development, incredibly important. Looking for new ways to learn, incredibly important, and learn from different people. We talk about mentoring actually a lot in terms of, you know, an older generation mentoring a younger generation. Look for reverse opportunities. Get younger generations to mentor you if you are of the older generation. Learn from them as much as them learning from you. I mean, this comes down to ensuring that you're match fit for the future.
Thank you, Vikas. Thank you. And there's a participant. Thank you for the very informative presentation.
You're very welcome.
Asel?
Yes, thank you, Vikas, again for being with us today. Dear participants, we're finishing this session. Thank you for your participation. See you soon.
Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.